She had done nothing wrong. That was the thought that kept coming back, over and over, as the sun pressed down on the cracked red earth and the wind carried nothing but dust and silence. She had done nothing wrong, and still they left her there. If you have ever felt abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love you, if you have ever been discarded like something worn out and no longer useful, then you already know something of what Clara felt on that morning when she opened her eyes and realized the wagon was gone, the fire was cold, and she was completely, terrifyingly alone. This is the story of a woman who was left in the desert to die, and the cowboy who came back. Before we go any further, if you have been watching this channel for a while, you know that every story here is told slowly, with heart, the way a good story should be told. If this is your first time, welcome, sit with us. And if this story moves you the way it moves the ones who write us every week, we would love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us what touched you, tell us where you are watching from, and if you have not subscribed yet, please do. These stories are made for you. Now, let us go back to Clara. Her name was Clara Voss, and she had come west the way many women did in those years, with a letter in her hand and a hope in her chest that maybe, just maybe, things could be different from what they had been. She had answered an advertisement. A man named Burl Hadley, a cattle farmer outside of Tucson, had written that he needed a wife who was hardworking and willing. Clara was both of those things. She had been a seamstress in Pennsylvania, alone after her mother passed, and her father drank himself into the ground, and the city had grown cold and unkind. The advertisement felt like a door opening. She had written back. Burl had written once more, short and businesslike, and said, "Come." So she came. She brought everything she owned in a single cloth bag. A blue dress she had sewn herself, a small Bible with her mother's handwriting in the margins, a photograph of a woman she barely recognized as her younger self, and enough quiet faith to carry her through 3 weeks on a train and 2 days on a wagon heading south into territory she had never seen before. Burl Hadley met her at the station. He was not the man she had imagined. He was older than his letter suggested, with a face that looked like it had never smiled without wanting something in return. He looked her over the way a man looks at livestock, slow and assessing, and then he nodded and said, "Get in the wagon." She should have known then. But she climbed up because what else was there to do? She was 1,000 miles from anything familiar, with a handful of coins and nowhere to go. The ride to the farm took hours. Burl said very little. Clara watched the desert open up around her, vast and red and still, and she told herself it was beautiful. She told herself she could learn to love it. She told herself that sometimes love is something you decide before you feel it. What she did not tell herself was the truth she was slowly beginning to sense, that Burl Hadley had no intention of marrying her. The farm was rougher than he had described. 2 hired men lived in a shack behind the main house, and they watched Clara with eyes that made her skin feel cold even in the heat. Burl gave her a room with a cot and a cracked window, and told her she would cook and clean and help with mending in exchange for room and board, until, as he said, things got settled. Things never got settled. She asked about the wedding twice. Both times Burl waved her off. Once he said the preacher was busy. Once he said the timing was not right. Clara waited. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended. She told herself she was being patient. She told herself she was being good. A month passed. Then one morning she woke before dawn to the sound of raised voices outside. She pressed her ear to the wall and heard Burl talking to one of the hired men, saying that the deal had fallen through, that he did not need another mouth to feed, that he had only sent for her because his brother had dared him to actually do it, and now it was not funny anymore. Clara stood very still in the dark. She had heard many hard things in her life. But there is something different about hearing that your existence was a joke, something that does not hurt so much as hollow you out completely. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. 2 days later, Burl told her they were going into town. He said he had business to settle, and she could come along for the ride. She believed him because she wanted to believe him, because people always want to believe the kind version of the story for just a little longer. They drove for an hour into the open desert. Then Burl stopped the wagon at a place where 2 dry washes crossed, and there was nothing in any direction but scrub and heat and a few twisted mesquite trees. He told her to get down. She thought he was joking. He was not. He told her that town was about 12 miles east. She could walk it by evening if she kept moving, and that her bag was her own problem. Then he dropped it in the dirt beside her. Clara stood there holding her cloth bag and stared up at him and asked him what she had done wrong. He said nothing. He just turned the wagon around and drove back the way they had come. She watched until the dust settled. Then she sat down on a rock in the middle of the desert, and she stayed very still for a long time because she did not know what else to do. The sun was already climbing. There was no shade. The bag at her feet held a dress and a Bible and a photograph and not a drop of water. She said one thing out loud to no one. She said, "I am not going to die out here." She did not quite believe it, but she said it anyway. She started walking. By mid-morning, her mouth was dry and her legs ached, and the heat pressed on her like something with weight and intention. She walked slowly because there was no use in rushing toward something she could not yet see. She thought about her mother. She thought about the city she had left. She thought about the letter she had written to Burl Hadley, and how carefully she had chosen every word, trying to sound capable and calm and worth choosing. She had tried so hard to be worth choosing. The thought made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. By midday, she could not walk anymore. She found the thin shadow of a rock formation and sat down against it and told herself she would rest for just a few minutes. The sun moved across the sky the way it does in the desert, slow and merciless and absolute. Her vision began to blur at the edges. She took out the Bible and held it in her lap. Not to read, just to feel something real and solid in her hands. She did not hear the horse until it was close. He almost missed her. Nate Calloway had been riding the South Range all morning, checking fence lines after the last wind had taken down a stretch of wire near the dry wash. He was not thinking about anything in particular. He was the kind of man who had learned over the years to keep his thoughts small and practical, because the larger ones tended to lead him nowhere good. He was 34 years old and had been running his family's ranch alone for 3 years, since his father died and his brother went east and never came back. He was not unhappy exactly. He was quiet in the way that a house gets quiet after something is gone from it. He had almost passed the rock formation when he saw the edge of a blue sleeve. He pulled up his horse. There was a woman sitting against the rock with a book in her lap and her eyes half closed and her lips so cracked they were bleeding. She was wearing a dress that was not made for desert heat and shoes that were made for city streets, and there was a cloth bag sitting beside her that looked like it held everything she owned. Nate sat on his horse for a moment and looked at her, and then he looked out at the empty land around them, and then he looked back at her. "Ma'am," he said. She opened her eyes. They were gray and they were exhausted, and they were, despite everything, still steady. She said, "I am not dead yet." He said, "No, you are not." He swung down from the horse. "But you would be by morning. Can you stand?" She could not quite, on her own. He did not make her feel ashamed of that. He simply steadied her arm and helped her up and gave her his canteen without ceremony, the way you give water to something living that needs it. She drank. Then she handed it back and looked at him. "I did not do anything wrong," she said, as if this was the most important thing and she needed someone to know it. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted. Not quite softening, but opening. "I believe you," he said. He took her to his ranch because there was nowhere else to take her. The nearest town was still hours away, and she was not strong enough for another long ride without rest and food and shade. He brought her inside and showed her where the pump was, and left her to wash up while he made something to eat. She sat at his kitchen table afterward and ate without speaking, and he sat across from her and drank coffee, and did not ask her anything, which she was grateful for. Later, when she had eaten and her color had come back, she told him everything. Not because she owed him the story, but because it had been sitting in her chest like something with no place to go, and she needed to set it down somewhere. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not tell her she should have been smarter or more careful, or that she should have known. He just listened. When she finished, he said, "You can stay here until you figure out where you want to go next." She looked at him. "You do not know me." "No," he said, "but I know what you are not. And you are not the kind of person who deserves to be left in the desert." She did not know what to do with that kind of directness. It was too honest to argue with and too kind to brush off. So she just nodded and looked out the window at the desert that had nearly taken her, and she thought that maybe, if you lived long enough and kept walking when your legs did not want to, something real could still find you. She stayed. There was no plan exactly. She slept in the small room off the kitchen and helped with whatever needed doing because she could not sit still and because working made her feel like herself again. She made meals and mended things and helped with the garden that was struggling in the heat, and slowly the ranch began to look a little more tended, a little less like a place that had given up on itself. Nate worked from before sunrise until well after dark. He was not a man who talked much, but he was not cold. He noticed things. When she seemed tired, he adjusted the work without making a point of it. When she seemed sad, he did not press her. When she did something well, he said so, plainly, without flourish. She was not used to being noticed without something being wanted in return. It unsettled her more than she expected. There was a dog named Patch who took to her immediately, a half-blind cattle dog who followed her around the kitchen and slept at the foot of her cot, and there was a small brown horse in the far pasture who let her bring him apples and press her forehead against his nose and just breathe. There was also a boy. His name was Sam. He was 8 years old, Nate's nephew, the son of the brother who had gone east. The brother had sent Sam west 6 months ago with a brief note saying he could not manage and please take him. Nate had said yes without question, because he was that kind of man. Sam was quiet in the way that children are quiet when they have learned that being invisible is safer. He sat at meals with his eyes on his plate and answered in single words when spoken to, and he did not cry, which worried Clara more than anything else about him. She knew that kind of quiet. She had worn it herself. She started small. She asked him what his favorite color was. He said he did not have one. She said that was all right. Sometimes she did not either. She asked him once if he wanted to help her with the bread. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before coming in, like he was expecting her to change her mind. She did not change her mind. She put flour on his hands and showed him how to knead, and he was terrible at it, and she laughed, and after a moment, very quietly, so did he. Nate watched this from the doorway one morning and did not say anything. That evening he told her, very quietly, that Sam had not laughed since he arrived. Clara looked at her hands. She said, "He just needs to know that someone is staying." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So do most people." She looked up at him. He was looking at the window, not at her. But she felt the weight of the words in the room, and it settled somewhere in her chest and stayed there. The trouble came the way trouble always does in dry country. Without warning, without mercy. It was late July when a grass fire started 3 miles to the south, blown by a dry wind that had been building all week. Nate saw the smoke from the ridge and came back to the ranch at a full gallop and said they needed to move the horses to the north pasture and soak the barn walls and do it now. They worked through the afternoon with the sky turning orange and the smell of smoke making everything sharp and close. Clara carried water. Sam helped without being asked, quiet and focused in a way that made her heart ache with pride for this boy she had not known 6 weeks ago. The fire came close. For 2 hours it was very close. And then the wind shifted. They stood in the yard watching the smoke drift east, and Clara realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from the release of it, the sudden loosening of something she had been holding very tight for a very long time. Sam pressed himself against her side. His arms went around her waist and he held on without saying anything. She put her hand on the back of his head and held on right back. Across the yard, Nate watched them, and something in his face did something she had not seen it do before. It broke open, just slightly, like ground after rain. That night, after Sam was asleep, Nate sat on the porch and Clara sat beside him, and for a long time they said nothing. The stars were enormous out there, the way stars only get when there is nothing between you and them. He said, "I have been trying to think of a good reason for you to stay." She did not move. She waited. He said, "I keep coming up with practical ones. The place needs tending. Sam needs a steadying hand. The garden is the best it has looked in years." He paused. "But those are not the real reasons." She looked at him. He looked straight ahead, the way men do when the thing they are saying is too real to say while looking at someone. He said, "The real reason is that this place feels like something again, and I think it is because you are in it." She thought about the woman who had sat in the desert with a cracked Bible and bleeding lips and told herself she was not going to die. She thought about all the quiet, careful years of making herself small enough to be acceptable and finding out it was never enough. She thought about the letter she had written to a stranger and how wrong that door had turned out to be. She thought that maybe the right doors do not always look like doors at first. "I am not going to chase easy anymore," she said quietly. "I think easy has been the thing that kept getting me into trouble." He turned and looked at her then. She said, "I would like to stay." He exhaled like he had been holding that breath for a long time. "Then stay," he said. They were married in September, on a morning when the desert had cooled and the light came in golden and low across the land, and Patch sat at their feet being completely undignified, and Sam stood beside Nate in a clean shirt that was too big for him and held the ring with both hands like it was something precious. The preacher was a kind man who had known Nate's father and said so, and Clara held a small bunch of wildflowers that Sam had picked himself, very seriously, early that morning. When the preacher said the words, and Nate said his and she said hers, she did not cry. She had done enough of that in her life for things that were not worth it. She was going to save her tears for the things that were. But when Sam, unprompted, reached over and took her hand during the prayer and held it, she felt something unlock in her chest so completely that she had to press her lips together very tight and look at the sky. Later that evening, after the small meal they had made together, after the preacher had gone and the dishes were done and the dog was asleep by the fire, Sam came to find her in the kitchen. She was putting things away. He stood in the doorway the way he always did, waiting. She looked at him. "What is it, Sam?" He looked at the floor, then at her. Then, very quietly, he said, "Is it all right if I call you Mama?" Clara set down what she was holding very carefully so she would not drop it. She crossed the kitchen and she knelt down and she put her hands on either side of his face, this small, serious boy who had been sent away by someone who was supposed to love him, and she said, "There is nothing in this world I would like more." He called her mama, every day, like it was the most natural thing, like she had always been there, and slowly, she began to believe it too. There are things that break you in this life. There are people who look at your value and find it wanting and turn away. There are deserts, real ones, and the other kind, that leave you with nothing but the ground under your feet and the quiet insistence that you are not done yet. Clara had survived all of those things, and what she found on the other side was not what she expected. It was not grand or sudden or the way the story was supposed to go. It was a man who spoke carefully and meant what he said. It was a boy who needed exactly what she had to give. It was a piece of land that was hard and honest and asked nothing of her but that she show up. It was home. Not the place she had been promised. Not the life she had planned. But the one that had been waiting out there in the desert, quiet and real, holding still until she found it. If Clara's story found its way into something you were feeling today, we would love to know. Leave us a comment below and tell us what touched you most. Tell us where you are watching from, because our viewers come from the most beautiful places, and it always means something to us to know. And if you are not yet part of our community here, please subscribe. Every story we tell is made with care, made slowly, made for people who still believe that love, real love, the kind that holds you up instead of wearing you down, is always worth waiting for. We will see you in the next story.